In today's video, I will show a technique called salting out, in which you can use to easily concentrate isopropyl alcohol. The benefits of this could be better burn time and more heat output, especially if using this for an alcohol stove. Or you could concentrate it in order to increase its antiseptic properties to be better used as a disinfectant. But one of my favorite things to do this for is to create a density demonstration. I had developed this demonstration myself without outside influence. However, I can't guarantee that nobody else has ever done it before. In my brief research, I believe myself to be the first to come up with this specific experiment. Not the salting out, but the density demonstration I make out of it. I hope you guys enjoy this cool, easy, at-home experiment, and thanks for watching. Hello YouTubers, my name is Trollface the Man, and today I'm going to show you how you can make a cool demonstration by salting out isopropyl alcohol. This method is very simple, and all you need is salt that is non-iodized. This is very critical, and one of the ways you can tell this is by looking at the ingredients and making sure it says that the only ingredient is salt, or otherwise known as sodium chloride. Next, we'll need some isopropyl alcohol. It's best if it's below 90%, as this method will only be able to concentrate the alcohol to a little over 90%, so anywhere between 30 and 70% is recommended for this experiment in order to achieve dramatic results. You're also going to need a container of some sort in order to mix all the ingredients in to achieve the effect we're looking for. I suggest something with a lid in order to make mixing in the salt easier. As such, I'm using a simple clear bottle which I had lying around in preparation for another experiment, but a jar can also work very nicely. If you're like me and are using a container with a small opening, I suggest using a funnel, or if you don't have one, using a piece of paper in order to get the salt in easier. And though not strictly necessary if you just plan on concentrating the alcohol, some food coloring can make this demonstration more interesting. This process is pretty simple. All I'm going to do is take my rubbing alcohol and pour it into my container, but first I have to open the top, of course. Now, what we actually are doing during this is the isopropanol weakly bonds with the water due to the fact that both can form hydrogen bonds. This is why isopropyl and water don't separate. As a matter of fact, the isopropyl alcohol actually attracts water even from out of the air. That is why outside of a laboratory environment, it is essentially impossible to find 100% isopropyl alcohol, for as soon as you open up the container and expose it to air, it begins diluting itself with atmospheric water. But when we add non-iodized salt to the water and isopropyl mixture, it does two things. One, the water likes to bond with the salt more than the isopropyl, and thereby it essentially muscles the isopropyl away from the water. And two, all the salt in the water makes the water significantly more dense, and because of this density difference, it makes it easier for the lighter isopropyl alcohol to separate from the salt water and float to the surface. So now I'm going to add the isopropyl alcohol and water mixture, otherwise known as rubbing alcohol, to the bottle. Remember, it needs to be isopropyl for this to work. I suggest that you do it a little cleaner than I do though. After reaching a pre-designated mark, I stop. This is in order for me to approximate how much salt I will need. I can figure that out by using the percentage of alcohol, in this case 50%, and the volume of the liquid I am using, assuming they use volume to measure it. And I will then take the total remaining water content left and, using a solubility table, figure out how much salt I will need to saturate the water. I will list a personal formula I've came up with in the description below. But to do this experiment, you actually don't have to worry at all about calculating how much salt you need, as you can just instead keep adding salt in small increments, let's say 3 tablespoons at a time, and vigorously stir or shake it until no more salt will dissolve in the solution. After that, all you have to do is just let it sit for a while and it should still work the same. If after that it still doesn't separate properly, make sure your salt is non-iodized and just sodium chlorate. Your rubbing alcohol is just isopropyl and not ethanol, and that you have stirred it enough to saturate the water with the salt sufficiently. I have already figured out how much salt approximately I'll need for this, which comes to just under 1/2 of a cup. But once again, if you haven't calculated it out, just keep adding and stirring in small increments until no more salt dissolves. I roll up my paper to make a funnel and add my 1/2 cup of non-iodized canning salt. After I add the salt, the solution turns very cloudy, but it will clear up in just a minute. But now I can move on to mixing the salt thoroughly, and I'm doing this by simply putting on the cap and vigorously shaking the container. After I feel I've shaken it enough, I'll let it sit and settle to see if it worked. If not, and there's no salt left in the bottom, I will simply add a little more salt and try again. However, I see that there is still in fact salt in the bottom, so instead of adding more, I shake it a bit again to try and get the remaining salt to dissolve more. This time, however, when I stop shaking it, we can very clearly see the alcohol and salt water begin to separate. The clear layer forming at the top is the isopropanol, while the hazy layer approaching from the bottom is salt water. I'll just give it a minute to completely separate. As we give it more time, it becomes more apparent that there is a clear dividing line between the alcohol and salt water. You can still see some salt particulate in the bottom of the container, which means I could have fared using maybe a little less salt, but overall the approximation looks good. At this point, the separation has become extremely clear to see. You can see a little bit of brown powder floating between the two layers. That is more than likely an anti-caking agent on the salt, or perhaps some type of micromineral that was in the salt. If you really wanted to separate the layers at this point, you could either decant, which is a fancy word for pour off, the concentrated alcohol, or suck it out using a syringe. Do not think about drinking it, as it is not ethanol, which is the stuff that actually induces drunken effects. This is isopropyl, and if you drink any good amount of it, you'll go blind, and then you'll more than likely die. Also, it does not affect the body the same way ethanol does, so no, it will not give you a buzz at all. Just kill you. Yeah. I, however, am going to leave mine together to turn into a rather interesting density demonstration. I shake it up one last time to make sure that the water is as saturated as I'm going to get it, and now is where the fun part comes into play. I'll add a few drops of my green food coloring to help make the separation of the two layers more visible. The food coloring obviously makes the layer separation extremely clear, but I'm going to shake it a bit and let it re-separate once again. You know, honestly, if it wasn't for the fact that it would kill you if you drank it, it looks kinda tasty. The food coloring acts differently with the salt water and rubbing alcohol, and as you can see, it produces two different colored layers. Just a quick close-up of the layers separating. I'm just adding a little dark blue in now to make the color a bit more vibrant. Now, one last thing you can do to really make this kind of pop is add in some canola oil or some other type of food oil. It might be surprising to some, but the oil is actually denser than the alcohol but lighter than the salt water, so it effectively suspends itself in the center of the two. It'll take a while, but the oil bubbles you see will eventually combine into a single layer, and they will do it indefinitely, meaning if you want, you can shake this bottle as many times as you like in order to show your friends the potentially mind-boggling differences in the layers. Most people will probably just be surprised that there's something that oil will sink in. Here are a couple of photos I grabbed showing off this specific display. You might notice that the colors are different than that in the video, but I can assure you that it is the same one. The photos you see here are true to life color. It's my video's camcorder that is off. Well, anyways guys, thank you very much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please remember to comment, rate, and subscribe. And feel free to check out some of my other content and continue to support this channel. It helps me make future videos, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and bye!